Something is happening to you right now that no one around you has a name for. You haven't failed. You haven't broken down. You haven't lost the thread of who you are. But something has gone quiet inside you. A machinery that once ran constantly, that kept you upright and moving and legible to the world. And in the silence it left behind, you don't know what you're supposed to do next. This video is about that silence, because what your mind is calling your lowest season, what every external signal around you is labeling as stagnation or collapse, Carl Jung spent a lifetime proving is something else entirely. It is the last dark hour before a dawn you can't yet see. And the dawn was already coming long before you started doubting it. The people most ready for the most beautiful chapter of their lives are almost never the ones who prepared the hardest for it. They are the ones who finally, quietly, exhaustedly stopped trying to earn it. That's the strange pattern Jung observed again and again throughout his decades of work. The transformation everyone waits for doesn't arrive as a reward for all the effort. It arrives when the effort runs out, when you stop. Think about the hour before sunrise. It is the darkest part of the night, not because the light is farthest away, but because it's the closest it has been in hours. From inside that darkness, you cannot feel the difference at all. The light is already there. It's already coming. You just can't see it yet. And most people, sitting in that particular cold, make the same mistake. They decide the darkness is permanent, and they go back inside. Jung spent the most significant years of his own life in exactly that hour. Not at the height of his fame, not surrounded by followers, but around the age of 38, after his break with Freud. Alone, genuinely frightened, convinced at times that he might be losing his mind. He wasn't a man who fixed himself and then wrote about it from a safe distance. He was someone who fell into the fracture, stayed there, and discovered that the thing he was most afraid of losing wasn't lost at all. It was being rebuilt into something that could hold far more than the old structure ever could. Everything he later taught about how a human being becomes whole emerged from that dark hour he almost didn't survive. What he learned is what I want to walk you through, quietly and honestly, over the next while. First, the specific psychological conditions that appear right before the most beautiful chapters of a life, and why almost everyone misreads them as failure instead of preparation. Second, why the beautiful chapter never resembles what you expected, and what it actually feels like from the inside when it begins to arrive. And third, what it means if you're standing in one of these conditions right now, weary and uncertain, and what becomes possible if you can stay with it instead of running from it. Because here's the part almost no one tells you. Beautiful chapters don't announce themselves as beginnings. They announce themselves as endings. Jung was struck by how consistent this was. The people who came to him on the edge of the most significant openings of their lives almost always described the opposite of opening. They said things were over. They felt like something had finished, not started. There was no trumpet, no sense of arrival, no clean feeling of a door swinging wide. There was just a strange, heavy stillness, and the conviction that they'd somehow missed their chance. Let me describe the feeling itself, because you'll recognize it if it belongs to you. It isn't dramatic despair. It isn't a crisis you could point to and name. It's a particular kind of weariness that has nothing to do with how much rest you've gotten or how hard you've been working. It's the exhaustion of having performed for a very long time, of having held something upright that required constant effort just to keep it standing. You've been someone specific for years, the strong one, the capable one, the one with answers, the one who holds it together, the one people lean on, the one who made the plan work. And somewhere along the way, that role stopped being a role and became indistinguishable from who you thought you were. Now, the energy it takes to keep being that person is running out. The fuel is simply gone, and you can't generate more of it, no matter how harshly you push yourself. Most people, when they hit this wall, read it as personal failure. They believe they did something wrong. They think they're not disciplined enough, not evolved enough, not resilient enough anymore. That everyone else seems to keep moving forward, and there's something broken in them that prevents it. Jung would tell them gently that they've been reading the signal completely backwards. What that exhaustion actually is, in his framework, is the ego reaching the outer edge of what it can sustain on its own. The ego isn't infinite. The identity it constructs, the way of moving through the world, the whole careful architecture of who you present yourself to be, all of it runs on energy. It costs something to maintain every single day, and when that energy finally runs dry, the depletion isn't evidence that something is broken. It's evidence that something is completing. There's an ancient idea Jung was drawn to, the notion that you have to be emptied before you can be filled. A vessel full of its old contents cannot receive anything new. There's simply no room. The exhaustion you're feeling, the sense that you've got nothing left, isn't the malfunction. It's the emptying. The old chapter demands the same energy at the end that it demanded at the beginning. And when you can no longer supply it, that's not the chapter defeating you. That's the chapter completing itself. If this exhaustion has been living in your chest, that heavy, unnamed tiredness you can't quite explain to anyone, drop 444. I am not broken. I am being rebuilt in the comments right now. Let that be your declaration today. Picture someone who spent 15 years building toward one thing, a relationship, a career, a whole version of themselves they were determined to become. They reached it. They actually got there. And now they're standing inside the achievement, feeling almost nothing that matches what they were promised they'd feel. Not ungrateful, not even depressed exactly, just hollow in a way that frightens them. Because how do you explain being empty inside the very thing you worked your entire life to obtain? This is precisely the moment Jung would lean forward, not to repair the emptiness, but to explain what it means. Because that hollowness at the center of the achievement isn't a sign you chose wrong. It's a signal that the part of you that chose has finished its work, and something deeper is beginning to stir underneath the surface. And that stirring has a texture. There's a specific inner sensation that arrives before real transformation. And it isn't hope, and it isn't clarity, and it isn't the clean feeling of being ready. It's It's something quieter and stranger than any of those. Jung recognized it in his patients, and he recognized it in himself. A kind of stillness that settles into the center of the exhaustion. A moment where the striving stops, not because you decided to surrender, but because something in you simply, finally let go. If you're finding something true in this for yourself, subscribe to Jung philosophy and share this with one person in your life who might need to hear it right now. The work Jung left behind was meant to reach the people who are ready for it. And you passing it on might be exactly what someone in their dark hour needs today. Now, I have to draw a careful line here, because there are two kinds of darkness, and they can look almost identical from the outside. One is the stillness of depression, and this one contracts. It pulls the world inward, makes everything small and gray and self-referential, closes the walls in until there's barely room to breathe. The other kind of stillness is different, and if you look closely enough, you can feel the distinction. It's spacious, frightening, yes, and uncertain, but open rather than closed. Depression makes the world feel like it's collapsing onto you. The stillness before a beautiful chapter makes the world feel enormous and very, very quiet. Like standing at the edge of something vast that you can't yet see the shape of. When the psyche starts moving toward a new chapter, it begins doing something Jung called the transcendent function, bridging the conscious mind and the unconscious in a way that produces something neither could generate alone. You don't experience it as a concept. You experience it as vivid, strange dreams that feel like they carry meaning even when you can't say what. You experience old memories surfacing, not as fresh wounds, but almost as information, as though some deeper part of you is reviewing the files. You develop unexpected interests. You sense that something is working on you, rather than you working on something. Jung found that this always preceded a significant new chapter. The unconscious moves first. It begins reorganizing the deep material long before the conscious mind has any idea why or where it's heading. So if you've been having the strange dreams, the odd pull toward things you can't explain, the quiet sense of being rearranged from the inside, that isn't you unraveling. That's the light doing its quiet work while the sky still looks like the middle of the night. 3 specific things have to finish before that light becomes visible. Not violently, not dramatically. They conclude the way a season concludes, running their natural course. And the period when all 3 are completing simultaneously is, almost without exception, the period that looks from the outside like you're falling behind. The first thing that has to complete is the performing self. And I want to be precise here, because it's not the self that performed poorly. It's the one that performed brilliantly. The competent one. The one who had it together, who knew what to do, who made things work and earned genuine recognition for it. This is the hardest one to release, precisely because it succeeded. It got you results. But the performing self was built for the old chapter. It knows the old terrain, the exact contours of the life you were living, the moves that worked, the ways to advance. When the terrain shifts, when the old chapter begins completing, that self suddenly has no map. All of its competence was tied to conditions that no longer exist. Jung watched people cling to this self long past the point where it served them. because letting it go felt like admitting defeat, like sliding backwards. What actually looked like regression was the necessary release of a tool that had already finished its purpose. The second thing that has to complete is your whole relationship with borrowed time. Almost everyone standing at the edge of a beautiful chapter has been living on the promise that the real life starts later. After the kids are grown, after the debt is settled, after this one relationship gets resolved, after the healing is finally done, after some condition out ahead of you is finally met. Jung recognized this as one of the ego's most reliable strategies for staying in control, keeping the real you permanently at arm's length, always waiting on the far side of a threshold that never quite arrives. The beautiful chapter can only begin when you stop deferring and actually step into the present you're standing in. And here's the mercy in it. You don't have to force that through willpower. It happens on its own when the deferral machinery finally runs out of fuel, when there is no more later left to postpone into, and the present is suddenly all you have. That's not a loss. That's the moment your life stops being a rehearsal. The third thing that has to complete is the waiting for permission. Buried inside many of us is a younger version who learned very early that starting anything real required someone else to say yes first. A parent's approval, a teacher's acknowledgement, the culture's endorsement. And that younger version grew into an adult who never quite stopped waiting for the same signal, usually without noticing the waiting was still happening. Waiting to feel ready enough, waiting for a sign, waiting to be qualified enough, healed enough, certain enough that no one could question the choice. Jung was direct about this. The permission was never going to come from outside. It was never available from outside in the first place. The only authorization that could ever open the beautiful chapter was the internal kind. The moment a person finally recognizes their own authority over their own life and stops waiting for anyone external to validate the beginning. That recognition doesn't feel triumphant when it arrives. It feels quiet, almost anticlimactic, like realizing a door you'd been standing in front of for years was never actually locked. These three completions are not achievements you accomplish. They're things that happen when you finally stop preventing them, when the exhaustion becomes total enough that you can no longer hold the old structures upright, and they're allowed, at last, to set themselves down. Which is why this period feels so much like failure while you're inside it. All three completions look, from every external angle, like stalling, like giving up. Like a person who used to be driven and capable, suddenly losing their edge and drifting. Your own mind, trained by a lifetime of measuring progress by output, tells you that this stillness is a problem to be solved. That you should be doing something, fixing something, pushing toward something. Everything in you insists that this quiet is dangerous. Jung sat inside this exact stillness in his own dark hour and came to understand it as the opposite of a problem. The three things weren't ending his life. They were clearing the ground for the part of it that couldn't grow while the old structures were still standing there, casting their shade over everything. What looked like the deepest black of night was the last dark hour before the sky changed. And the sky was already changing, quietly, invisibly, whether he could see it yet or not. And that's the strange mercy of it. The sky doesn't wait for you to believe in it before it starts turning. The whole time you're sitting in the dark, convinced you've stalled out, convinced the stillness is permanent, something underneath the surface is already rearranging itself according to a logic you haven't been given access to yet. Write 1111. I trust what I cannot yet see in the comments right now, because the dawn is already in motion. It was moving the whole time you sat in that darkness, questioning whether morning was even real. Now, what does the beautiful chapter actually look like when it arrives? Jung spent decades watching people reach what the world would call their best chapter. The promotion, the relationship, the recognition, and feel nothing. Performing gratitude while privately wondering what was wrong with them. Smiling in the photographs while the hollowness deepened. These people had gotten what they wanted. The problem was that the wanting had come from a self they'd already outgrown, and the fulfillment was being delivered to an address where no one lived anymore. Then he observed a different group, people whose external circumstances were sometimes less impressive than before. Smaller lives by conventional measurement, fewer accolades, less visibility. But something had altered in them that Jung could sense the moment they walked into his office. A quality of presence, a groundedness that didn't depend on anything outside them holding steady. They weren't performing wellness. They were actually well, in a way that went deeper than mood or circumstance. When he asked what had shifted, they struggled to articulate it. The most consistent answer was some version of, "I just finally feel like myself." That phrase, "I finally feel like myself," became one of Jung's most reliable markers, because the people who said it couldn't explain the change in terms of events or achievements. The change was structural. It happened at the level of where their choices originated. Before, decisions had come from a kind of committee, fear arguing with desire, obligation overruling instinct, the performing self managing every move for maximum approval and minimum exposure. After the shift, decisions emerged from somewhere quieter, somewhere that didn't need to argue its case or justify its position. The committee hadn't vanished entirely, but it had lost its veto power. Something underneath it had started navigating, and that something was more honest than the committee had ever been. Jung called this the self, and he meant something very precise by it. The self, in his framework, is the deeper organizing center of the whole psyche, conscious and unconscious together. The ego is the center of consciousness, the I that makes plans and monitors impressions and worries about outcomes. The self is larger. It holds the ego, encompasses the shadow, includes everything the conscious mind never learned to access. And when the ego's grip loosens enough for the self to begin influencing a person's life, the quality of that life shifts in ways the ego could never have engineered. This is what the beautiful chapter actually is. The ego stepping aside, not destroyed, not conquered, just gently moved from the driver's seat to the passenger seat, and the self beginning to navigate. And then something else begins to happen that Jung documented carefully, something he called synchronicity. Before you dismiss it, hear what he actually meant, because it's more grounded and precise than the version that has been circulating in self-help culture for decades. Jung wasn't talking about magical thinking. He wasn't suggesting the universe rearranges itself to favor enlightened people. What he observed was specific. When a person's internal state shifts, when the ego's agenda releases and the self begins to guide, the person starts noticing things that were already there. Connections they'd been walking past, possibilities they'd been too defended to perceive. People whose presence answered a question they hadn't known how to ask. The external world didn't change. Their capacity to perceive it did. Think about what happens when you're desperately forcing something to work. All of your attention narrows onto the goal. Your field of vision contracts to the strategy, the next move in the sequence you've committed to. You walk past doors because they're on the wrong wall. Now think about what happens when that effort finally exhausts itself. The field of vision widens. The desperate focus softens. Things that were always present, sitting quietly at the edges of your narrowed attention, become visible. A conversation with someone you'd overlooked. An impulse towards something that carries a strange sense of rightness you feel in your body before your mind can justify it. Jung noticed these moments clustered most densely around periods of genuine psychological transition. His explanation was precise. The unconscious operates on a broader bandwidth than the conscious mind. It processes more information, recognizes more patterns, perceives more connections. When the ego's narrow focus dominates, most of that processing gets overridden. When the ego steps aside, all of that unconscious intelligence becomes available. The person doesn't suddenly attract better circumstances. They become capable of perceiving what was already present, but invisible. And then there's the matter of joy. Because the joy that arrives with the beautiful chapter doesn't resemble what most people were trained to expect. The ego's version of joy is episodic, a peak, a spike, the moment of the promotion or the breakthrough or the standing ovation. It rises sharply and then fades. And when it fades, you start searching for the next spike because you've learned to associate joy with those high-frequency bursts. The joy Jung observed in people living their beautiful chapter operated entirely differently, lower in pitch, steadier, less dependent on specific events going right, more connected to an ambient quality of daily experience. A person would describe noticing the quality of light in a room, not because they'd started a mindfulness practice, but because something had quieted inside them enough to let the light through. They'd feel the texture of a conversation rather than managing it. The constant background noise of performance and strategy had dimmed enough for sensation to reach them unfiltered. Jung connected this to what he called the afternoon of life, the psychological second half, regardless of chronological age. The first half is governed by building, accumulating, establishing identity and structure in the world. The second half, when it goes well, is governed by depth over breadth, meaning over achievement. The question shifts from what can I build to what is actually alive in me? And the joy that comes from honestly answering that question doesn't spike, it hums. The hum
once you settle into it, is more sustaining than any spike ever was. One of the most consistent features Jung noticed was how the energy spent on performance became available for other things, and this was not a small amount. Maintaining a persona, monitoring how you're being received, adjusting your presentation in real time, all of this runs constantly beneath every interaction, exhausting in a way most people never register because they've never experienced the alternative. When that machinery finally goes quiet, the freed energy flows into presence, into creative work born from genuine impulse rather than calculation, into relationships where the person is finally, truly available. Now here's the part that requires real honesty from you. Everything I've just described, the self navigating, the synchronicities appearing, the quieter joy, all of it might already
be beginning in your life. And you might be looking directly at it without recognizing it. Jung found this pattern so consistently that he considered it one of the central ironies of psychological development. The beautiful chapter arrives, and the person misses it. They miss it because they're watching for something else, something louder, something that matches the image they'd been holding. The chapter arrives in a form the ego didn't construct, and the ego, which can only recognize what it already has categories for, processes it as noise, as irrelevance, as not quite right. A woman stops forcing a career direction and starts paying attention to what actually energizes her. And the thing that energizes her looks, by every conventional measure, like a step down. Smaller, less impressive on paper, less likely to earn the recognition she'd been trained to pursue. She almost dismisses it, almost walks past it, because it doesn't fit the blueprint she was carrying. The beautiful chapter was sitting right there, and it looked like a demotion. A man who spent years building an impressive social world lets the effort drop and finds himself with 3 people instead of 30. 3 people who actually know him. 3 people he can sit with in silence without performing anything. And his first reaction is that something has gone wrong. His world has contracted. His social worth has evaporated. Only slowly does he recognize that the 3 are more genuine than the 30 ever were, and that this quieter configuration is the first real relational home he's ever actually inhabited. Jung would tell both of them the same thing. The beautiful chapter didn't fail to arrive. Your definition of beautiful failed to expand. The shift that allows a person to finally recognize it isn't intellectual. It doesn't come from understanding a theory about the self. It comes from a change in what they treat as evidence. They stop measuring their life against the old blueprint and start measuring it against something much harder to fake. Aliveness. Does this feel alive? Does this conversation carry a charge of genuine contact? Does this work make something stir in me that strategic planning never touched? Does this quieter, smaller, less impressive version of my life feel more like mine than the loud version ever did? That question, does this feel like mine, turns out to be the compass the beautiful chapter navigates by. And it's a compass the performing self never had access to, because the performing self was always navigating by someone else's coordinates. Everyone carries what might be called an old story, not just about their pain, but about who they are and what's available to them. Some of that story is accurate. Some of it was written by people who didn't know you well enough to write it. I'm not creative. I don't deserve things to come easily. These aren't observations. They're inherited scripts that hardened into belief simply because they were repeated often enough. The beautiful chapter asks you to hold each piece up to the light with honest curiosity, not self-criticism, which is just the old story wearing a different face, but genuine assessment. Which pieces still belong to you? Which describe someone you used to be? Every layer released makes you more available for the chapter that's already forming. And this brings us to the thing Jung held with more confidence than almost anything else in his body of work. He was not a man who offered comfort lightly. He had watched too many people suffer through false reassurance. He didn't promise easy outcomes or specific timelines. He didn't promise the beautiful chapter would look the way you imagined. But there was one thing he stated with something close to certainty, because he'd witnessed it too many times to treat as coincidence. The psyche does not bring a person to the edge of their old life without having prepared something on the other side. If you're standing in the space between chapters right now, the old one finishing, the new one still invisible, every signal your nervous system is sending tells you the edge is the end, that what's coming is emptiness or worse. Jung heard this from patients constantly, the conviction that they'd arrived at the end of the road. And he sat with that conviction patiently, because he had watched enough people arrive at exactly that conviction and then, slowly, sometimes agonizingly, discover it was wrong. He knew this partly because he had lived it himself. The years after his break with Freud, the Red Book period, looked from every external angle like collapse. His reputation fractured. His closest intellectual relationship dissolved. He found himself alone with psychological material so disorienting that he genuinely questioned his own sanity. There was no evidence from inside that anything worthwhile was forming. Only darkness. Only the unrelenting confrontation with parts of himself he'd never faced. And yet, what emerged from those years became the foundation of his entire life's work. The ideas that shaped psychology, philosophy, literature, and art across the following century, all of it born in the period that looked most like destruction. The psyche hadn't brought him to the edge to abandon him there. It brought him to the edge because the edge was where the new material lived. So let me speak to you directly now, because everything has been building toward this. You've been waiting, maybe consciously, maybe in that half-aware way where you sense the waiting without being able to name what for. Something to shift, something to give you the signal that it's time, that you're ready, that the conditions are right, that you have enough clarity or healing or strength to step into whatever comes next. You've been performing patience, or performing effort, or performing surrender. And underneath every performance is the same quiet ache. When does the real part begin? Jung spent his life studying this question, and the answer he arrived at is going to challenge something you've probably been carrying since you were young enough to absorb it without questioning. You've been waiting for permission from a parent who couldn't give it, from a culture that was never going to offer it, from a version of yourself that you hoped would eventually feel qualified enough to grant it. You've been waiting for something outside you to say the word, to confirm the direction, to tell you that you are allowed to begin. The permission was never coming from out there. Jung was certain of this. The only authorization that can open the beautiful chapter is yours. And the reason it hasn't felt available isn't that you're unready. It's that you've been looking in the wrong direction, outward, toward validation that was never available externally, instead of inward, toward a knowing that has been there far longer than you realize. Here is the circular truth the whole of this has been turning on. The beautiful chapter doesn't come to people who prepared correctly. It comes to people who stopped performing readiness, stopped rehearsing for the future, stopped managing the distance between who they are and who they think they're supposed to be. The stopping isn't collapse. The stopping is arrival. You stop because the machinery of the old chapter has finally run its course. And what remains when the machinery goes quiet is the person the machinery was built to protect. The actual one. The one who doesn't need to perform their way into the next chapter, because the next chapter was built from material the performing self never had access to. The psyche doesn't dismantle what it cannot rebuild. Jung staked decades on that. The exhaustion you feel is a completion, not a failure. The stillness is preparation, not stagnation. The loss of the old map is the clearing required for a new kind of navigation, one that moves by honesty rather than strategy, by aliveness rather than approval, by the felt sense of what is genuinely yours rather than the calculated pursuit of what impresses people who aren't living your life. The beautiful chapter is beginning. I know that's almost impossible to believe from inside the hour you're in. The sky still looks dark. The evidence around you still points toward ending rather than opening. The people who love you may still see crisis where there is actually transition. And you, sitting with the emptiness, carrying the weight of something you can't name, wondering whether this stillness will ever give way to movement. You might be the very last one to see it. But here is what I want you to hold, not as an idea, but as something you let settle into your chest like a hand on your shoulder. The dawn does not wait for you to believe in it. It comes anyway. It was coming the entire time you sat in the dark, questioning whether morning was real. It was coming while you doubted. It was coming while you grieved the old chapter. It was coming while you told yourself the story that said nothing was. the chapter forming quietly underneath the noise of the old one finishing. In the space that opened when you finally stopped forcing it, is closer than anything in your current experience would suggest. You won't recognize it by its volume. You won't recognize it by how impressive it looks to people watching from the outside. You'll recognize it by its weight, by the way it settles into your chest like something that belongs there, by the feeling, for the first time in as long as you can remember, of being inside your own life. Not managing it, not performing it, not watching yourself live it from behind a pane of glass, but actually, fully, finally inhabiting it. Jung wouldn't promise you it will be easy. He wouldn't promise it will look the way you imagined or arrive on your timeline. He would promise you something far better than either of those things. He would promise you that it will be real, and that after a lifetime of performance, after all those years inside a chapter written by someone else's expectations, someone else's definitions, someone else's idea of what a successful life looks like, real is the only thing worth walking toward. The light is already in the sky. It has been there the whole time. You just haven't looked up yet. And when you do, when the stillness finally opens and what has been forming in the dark becomes visible, you will understand with a clarity no amount of planning could have given you that the dark hour wasn't the end of your story. It was the last page of the chapter that had to finish so the next one could begin. And the next one, the one written from the inside out, from the self outward, from what is alive in you rather than what is expected of you. That chapter was worth every hour of darkness it took to reach it. You are almost there. You were always almost there. The dawn just needed you to stay.